Hey everyone, it's Carissa Wiley at sprinkledwithglitter.com. Thanks for joining me today. Today I am sharing all of the brand new products from the Essentials by Ellen line, and I am going to share a ton of information. I'm going to share how I create a ton of sentiment strips all at once, and I'm going to share 3 card projects featuring some of these brand new products. So I wanted to just walk you through the products to show you what's available first. I will have everything linked for you in the YouTube description below, so check there, or you can head on over to my blog at sprinkledwithglitter.com to see everything linked and listed there as well. So there's some great new products in this release. There are these fabulous sentiment hot foil plates and stamp sets, as well as the coordinating sentiment strips die that I'm going to show you in action. And there's a brand new press plate. This is a solid hot foil plate that allows you to do some negative foiling. Now for the projects today, I'm going to kind of concentrate on these. I have the beehive die set, as well as the 1 in a bazillion stamp set, and this honeycomb background builder, which I think is so cool because you get 2 dies. Now one will cut out this pattern here, and the other one actually cuts out that frame. Now these coordinate together to where you can layer them on top of each other, which I'll show you here, or you can cut a die cut window in that hexagon shape, or you can use this little frame shape that I have over the top of that other as a topper for a shaker window. You can stack these up. You can use the inside parts. There's so many great ways to use these. But let's start out by making a ton of sentiment strips. So I have the Positive Vibes hot foil stamp on my Gemini foil press. And when I'm using the Glimmer hot foils with the Gemini foil press, I like to use the medium setting. So I've placed that with the pretty side down onto my hot foil plate. I've added my smooth white cardstock and then the shim that comes with the Gemini foil press to this sandwich, and I've set my timer for a minute. Once that minute timer is up, I'm going to remove the base from the platform, and I'm going to run this through my Gemini Junior die cutting machine, and that's going to apply pressure to transfer the foil onto the cardstock. Now I'm going to show you this here with the black foil, and I think this is so sharp because you get these crisp black foiled images on this white cardstock, and it's great to add some ink blending over the top of or add some direct to paper ink. Now I foiled these Positive Vibes sentiments again using the champagne colored foil from Glimmer or Spellbinders Glimmer system. And now I am taking these sentiments and I'm using the coordinating sentiment strips die from the Essentials by Ellen line. These are all brand new today. And I'm lining that up, holding it in place with some low tack tape and running that through my Gemini Junior. And it's going to die cut all of these sentiment strips at once. So I have this black foil on white cardstock. There is so much that you can do with these black foiled sentiments on white cardstock. You can make colored sentiment strips, you can ink blend over the top, or you can just use them as they are. Now I die cut the gold foiled or the champagne foiled sentiments as well, using that same sentiment strips die. And I have so many sentiment strips in a matter of just minutes. Now I used the black foil and the champagne foil because those are the sentiment strips that I would reach for the most. But if you're a fan of like a holographic foil, you could use that instead. Or if you find yourself using silver more than gold, there are silver foils available. And I'm going to take all of these sentiment strips and just kind of house them in a little jar on my desk. So the next time I'm creating, I can just grab one of these sentiment strips and I'm ready to go. And I really love that these are just really basic sentiments. There's a sentiment for every occasion, and there's some fun ones in there as well, like You Rock and XOXO. Now remember how I mentioned you could add just a little bit of ink over the top of this to create a colored sentiment strip? This black foil does a great job resisting a direct to paper inking technique. So I can make a pink sentiment out of these strips. I'm just going to wipe off any excess ink that's sitting over the top of my foil. And just like that, I have a colored sentiment strip instead of black on white. So here's a look at the three kind of variations here. You could absolutely add the colored ink over the gold foil as well. I just think that the black really stands out really well against that colored ink. Now, another thing you could do is take and blend some ink with a blending brush right over these foiled sentiments as well. And that will add a lighter, kind of softer color to these sentiments instead. And I feel like over the gold foil that this allows the gold to kind of stand out a little bit more and not be overtaken by the bold ink color behind it. But you can experiment with these. Like I said, you can create so many sentiment strips in such a short amount of time that these really are just quick and easy to make and great to have on hand because there's a lot you can do with them. And they're great sentiments that you'll use every day. Birthday, love you, congratulations, all sorts of things. You should really check it out. Now, I know not all of you have jumped on the hot foil bandwagon yet. And while I am sad for you, I am also very happy for you because Ellen Hutson, the Essentials by Ellen line, has not left you out. This Way with Words stamp set is a great one-piece sentiment strip stamp set that coordinates with that exact same die that we used with the Positive Vibes hot foil set. So you can stamp and emboss or just stamp all of these sentiments all at once, cut them and have them on hand. So I'm going to start out by mounting this in my Misty stamping tool because it is a very large one-piece stamp. I don't have a block that fits something like this. I suppose you could try to use a block, but a Misty stamping tool is a great way to go. And I'm going to prep some Essentials by Ellen. Is it called Ebony cardstock? It's their black cardstock. It's a great black cardstock. It's super smooth. I've prepped it with my powder tool. I'm inking up my stamp using some Versamark ink, and I'm going to stamp this onto my black cardstock. Now, keep in mind, these sentiments are very fine lines, so you don't want to do stamp CPR on your stamp here. You just want to add pressure over the entire thing, light, even pressure to transfer that ink. And if your ink pad is properly inked up, you should have plenty of ink transfer. And then you can add your white embossing powder over the top of this, or if you wanted gold or silver, you could do that as well. I'm just tapping off the excess, making sure I don't have any stray embossing powder in areas that I don't want it. And then I'm going to take my heat tool and I'm going to melt all of this embossing powder. Now, when you go to melt this much embossing powder, you want to make sure that your heat tool has preheated so that it's to its maximum heat. You want to keep your heat tool moving so that you're not warping this cardstock too much, because we will take our die and place it over the top of this and run it through the die cut machine. And if it's too warped, it can make placing that die a little bit more difficult. So I took my microfiber cloth and wiped off the excess powder that was on my cardstock. And then I ran this through my die cut machine using that sentiment strips die. And I have all of these white heat embossed on black cardstock sentiments. Now, we're going to make some black sentiments on white cardstock as well. And these are great for adding color to using that direct to paper inking technique that I showed you earlier. I used some black pigment ink to stamp these onto this white cardstock and then covered it with a layer of clear embossing powder. And that's really going to help these sentiments pop, especially if you add some inking over the top. I took that sentiment strips die cut these with one pass of the die cut machine, and look at this. I have a ton of sentiments. Now, I took the leftover foil and the new press plate from the Essentials by Ellen line. It is their solid hot foil plate. And I created these negative foiled sentiment strips as well. And I'll show you how to do that in another video. This video is going to be rather lengthy, so I didn't want to overwhelm you. But I did want to show you that creating a ton of stamped or hot foiled sentiment strips all at once is super easy. I can set these aside and we can start working on some card projects featuring this 1 in a bazillion stamp set to begin with. I have a few of the images from that, and I'm stamping them using some Gina K Obsidian Amalgam ink onto some Nina Solar White cardstock. I'm using my Misty stamping tool for this, and then I can take and add some color using some Copic markers. Now, I want to make sure that this ink is dry before I take my Copic marker to it. So I'm just quickly heat setting it to make sure I don't get any smudging. And once it's completely heat set, you have a Copic friendly ink. Now this black ink is one of my favorites, and it's also great for watercoloring or just doing basic stamping as well. Now I'm taking my Copic markers and I'm starting with my lightest color, and then I'm going to the medium shade and then the darkest shade, and then working in reverse order in those Copic colors to add some shading to all of my images here. And I will I will list the colors that I used for all of this coloring over at my blog at sprinkledwithglitter.com. There will be a link to this blog post in the YouTube description below, so be sure to check there. And I am going to now, once I've colored all of these images, I'm going to line up the coordinating dies, hold them in place with some low tack tape, and run them through my die cut machine. And you can see I stamped that extra little jar of honey at the bottom. I'm going to actually trim out just the label on that because I am going to do a realistic glass effect on this honey jar. And I want that label to kind of stay free and clear from this glass effect that I'll be creating. So I just am going to take my scissors and fussy cut that out so it's ready to go. Now, once I have that trimmed out, I actually die cut 3 more of the jars of honey from some plain white cardstock because I'm going to be adding a lot of layers of embossing powder over this jar of honey, and I want it to kind of have some stability. So I'm going to stack these up. I have the 3 plain white die cuts here. I'm adding some liquid glue to the top of those, and then I'm just going to stack those 3 plain white die cuts behind the one that I've added the Copic coloring to. And this is going to make a really solid chipboard-like die cut and colored embellishment for the front of my card, but it's also going to help it stand up to all of the embossing powder and the heating that I'm going to do over the top of this to create that realistic glass effect. Now, once I have these stacked up, I'm going to take some blocks and just set them on the top of it and allow this glue to kind of set up. And once it's set up, I am going to add a little bit of Tonic Aqua Shimmer Pen to just the honey part. I don't have to worry about overlapping the label because I'm going to be placing that other label that I fussy cut out on top of this. And I'm going to take just a scrap piece of white cardstock, add a little bit of tape runner adhesive to the end to create a handle for this because I'm going to be doing a couple of layers of clear heat embossing over the top of this jar. So I am using a Versamark pen. This is the same ink that I use for embossing, but it's in a pen form, so I have a little more control. And I'm adding that Versamark ink right over the glass areas of the jar. I'm avoiding the lid and I'm trying not to go outside of the lines because I don't want it on the plain white area surrounding that stamped image. And once I have that Versamark ink down, I'm going to add a layer of clear embossing powder and then heat set that. Now I added a second layer of embossing powder in the same exact way that I just showed you. I used the Versamark pen to add more ink, added another layer of embossing powder and heat set that. And you can see I have that really cool, shiny, dimensional, glassy look on the jar. And now I can take this label that I fussy cut and add some liquid glue to the back and just place it over the label that's on the jar. Now I did this because if I got any clear embossing powder on the label that was already on the jar, this label would be clean by putting a new one over the top of it. So if you want to be more careful and not have to do the fussy cut label, you could absolutely do that, but this is just the way I did it. So now that my little honey jar is ready, I have a die cut honeycomb background builder. This is the die set that I showed you at the beginning of the video. I've die cut it from some plain white cardstock, and I am just doing a little inking with a direct to paper technique using some Catherine Pooler inks. These inks transfer, or these ink pads, I should say, transfer ink really well because of their foam surface instead of a felt surface. So you don't get like those kind of dry brush lines that you can get using a felt ink pad for this. So I really like to use these for direct to paper. And I have a little stamped and die cut heart from the Essentials by Ellen High Five die and stamp and die set. I love this. I use it so much. And I'm just kind of grouping up these elements together and adhering them onto a top folding Ace 2 size card base that I created using some Essentials by Ellen linen cardstock. Now I took that honeycomb background builder and I also die cut it from some Spellbinders mirror gold cardstock, and I popped up some of those little hexagon shapes onto my card front. I added a little bit of a fake honey drip using a Copic marker, and I covered that with some glossy accents. And I took one of those foiled sentiment strips that I created earlier. I snipped it apart and I added it onto my card front for an adorable foiled sentiment. Now I'm going to use that direct to paper inking technique again on this beehive die. And I'm starting out with the Tiara ink or the Tiara ink from Catherine Pooler. And then I'm moving to Sauna, which is a little bit deeper, more rich yellow color, kind of like, I would almost describe it as more of a mustardy yellow color. It's really beautiful. And I'm going to finish that off by adding a little bit of the ginger ink from Catherine Pooler. Now, the ginger ink is one of the newer ink colors from Catherine Pooler. She's released a few new ink colors over the last few months. Ginger, I believe, was in maybe April, and then they released some new ink colors in June as well. So those are all available, and that ginger is one of the April colors that was released. So you can see I've just taken my ink pads directly to this die cut to add some shading. By using a few different colors of ink, I've added some depth and dimension along the edge, but it didn't take me a long time to add all of this color and shading. Now, if you wanted to make it even easier, you could start with a colored die cut. My collection of yellows in my cardstock it's not deep. I don't have a lot of yellows. And so I decided to use these inks instead because I knew that they would coordinate with the Copic markers that I was using as well. Now, I have to admit, when I first saw this die set, I did not know what the smaller die was for. And it dawned on me at this moment, oh, that's to create the little door to the beehive. And I'm sure bees don't call them doors, but that's what it is to me. It's a door. So I positioned that in place and I used a little low-tack tape to hold it there onto my beehive. I did miss the bottom by just a little bit, but not a big deal. I just trimmed off that little sliver of cardstock that was left over with my scissors. And then I have my little opening for my beehive. Now, once again, direct to paper technique, adding some color to this white cardstock and using the honeycomb background builder die to die cut the frame version of this honeycomb background builder. And I'm going to use that. You can see I've gone through a lot of iterations on this card. I really could not decide what I wanted to do. And I ended up turning off the camera and walking away and not coming back till I think the next day. And this is where it all fell into place for me. I gave my brain a break. I came back and everything kind of started clicking. And I decided I wanted to use 3 of these honeycomb background builders. I have one in Coral Cabana, one in Do-Si-Do, and one in the Sauna ink, all using that direct to paper technique that I just showed you. And I'm adhering them onto my A2 size card base using some liquid glue. And you can see I have my beehive off to the left there. I have another sentiment strip that I considered using and I didn't end up using off to the right there. I had the same sentiment strip in the white on black, and I just tucked it into the opening of the beehive there and just kind of adhered it there so it looks like it's kind of peeking out from the beehive. And then I added this adorable little bee. This is from the 1 in a Bazillion stamp and coordinating die set that I showed you earlier. And I finished this card off with a few more of those die cut hexagon shapes using the Spellbinders mirror gold cardstock to add just a little hint of gold to this card project. So that's card number 2 All of these cards feature the sentiment strips that I created earlier in this video. So that you just saw me trim down is actually the scrap from when I created the honeycomb backgrounds for the previous card. And I thought those inks look really cool together. So I cut a strip of that where it goes from the Sauna to the Do-Si-Do to the Coral Cabana ink. And I'm going to use that on my card. And I've die cut like 4 of these honeycomb background builder frames, and I'm stacking them up, 3 out of plain white cardstock and 1 out of the blended cardstock that I actually created at the beginning of the last card. I know, so confusing, but this is kind of how it works sometimes. Sometimes you create things for a card and they don't work, but you can use them on a different card. So to give this honeycomb background frame a little bit of dimension, I stacked 3 plain white die cuts together using liquid glue. I'm going to top it off with this one, and this has Mandarin Spice, Coral Cabana, and Do-Si-Do inks kind of direct to paper added over the top of it. So it will have a little bit of dimension. And I have a die cut rectangle here. I use the Essentials by Ellen Essential Rectangles to die cut that little kind of card front that I'm using there. And I'm going to add some liquid glue onto the back of this inked piece. I'm using the grid on my glass mat to make sure that I get this straight onto this card front. And then I'm going to take a strip of gold cardstock as well. Now I made this cardstock using a solid hot foil plate and the Champagne Glimmer Spellbinders foil. So you can actually create your own foil cardstock using those solid hot foil plates. And that's exactly what I did. I just trimmed it down into an 1/8 of an inch strip here and adhered it onto my card base using some liquid glue. Now, once again, just using some more liquid glue to adhere this stacked up honeycomb background builder onto my card base, and I'm just lining up those hexagons that kind of run in a straight line along the line of that inked strip that I created earlier. And again, I have another one of these stamped and die cut hearts from the Essentials by Ellen High Five stamp and die set. And I'm just kind of arranging these along with a couple of those hot foiled sentiments that I created using the Positive Vibes hot foil plate. I've trimmed those down, kind of cut them apart using my scissors, and I'm going to add them onto this card front using a little bit of foam adhesive just as they are. And I love the simplicity of this card. It's got some hexagons in the back, which give it like that geometric feel, but then you've got the heart and all the colors. And I added this card front onto a top folding A2 size card base using some foam adhesive to give it a little more dimension. And that finishes off card number 3 today. Wow, I can't even believe it. That was kind of a marathon video, but I hope you enjoyed a look at some of these new products from the Essentials by Ellen line and all of these projects that I created. They're all just a little bit different, and you can see how versatile these products really are. I absolutely love the idea of creating all of these sentiment strips ahead of time and having them on hand for when you want to create a quick card, or using scraps that are on your desk and just kind of adding that sentiment strip on top to complete it. As always, I will have links to the products used in these projects in the description at YouTube, so you can check there if you're looking for something in particular, or you can head on over to my blog at sprinkledwithglitter.com. That will be linked in the YouTube description below as well. Over there, I'll have more still shots, more information, and a complete list of supplies. As always, thank you so much for stopping by. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications here on my YouTube channel so you won't miss any of my paper crafting and card making video tutorials. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the very end. You know, if you've made it this far, you are one of my favorites. To subscribe to my channel, go ahead and click the button on the left side of the screen. And here's a couple more video tutorials I thought you might enjoy.